All right, well, welcome everyone to this DLTV webinar on the 23rd of June, 2022. And today we welcome Mike McDermott. Mike has been doing some terrific work with diverse needs students and involves all sorts of tinkering and making with devices that digital technologies teachers would be familiar with, things like microbits and makey and cardboard and other things. So I'll ask Mike to fully introduce himself in a moment, but today's session, we're doing it as a sort of an interview format. So I'll ask a series of questions and prompts and Mike will sort of respond to those as we go through.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Nathan, for inviting me today. Just first of all, it's been a long journey for me through work and stuff, but way back in the 90s, I was a teacher. I was a long time ago secondary school teacher. And basically what's happened is about, what is it now? 12 years ago, I was doing adolescent health at Melbourne Uni, and then I started in disability, which had a lot to do with my son who has a disability. And what I'll show you through this is as I was working through it and started to visit a number of the special schools in Melbourne, particularly in the east, what I was surprised about was that the young people I was meeting there, and look, this is just what happens for a lot of people when they first start to understand more about disability. I suddenly realized there's these young people with, they might have complex autism, they might have complex cerebral palsy, but they're missing out on the skills that young people across Victoria, across Australia, are being told that they absolutely need for both their work and life past school, which is the creative and critical skills. And that sort of got me down this road of thinking, well, what is it that particularly young people at special schools need in terms of creative and critical skills?
Yeah, I think you've already started talking about that first slide.
Yeah.
Did you want me to? I think the next slide is a bit of a prompt image there for you.
Yeah. So this is where I first I went to the Bullen Autism School, and I went there. I was working at Scope, and I went there to talk about what Scope services were and everything. And what the students did and the teachers did is they said, no, we don't want you speaking. We want you to come into this room. We want you to sit on this line chair. There was this chair with this line thing around it. And they said, we want you to listen. And the senior students there were talking about gaming. They were talking about the fact that they love music. They were talking about art. They were talking about all these things that they wanted to do past school. And I was just sitting there going, do you know what? The day services that we have don't offer that. So what's the disconnect here? And it got me thinking, and I got talking to the teachers at Bulleen Heights, who are just fantastic. And I started looking around, and I particularly looked to the US, because the US have been doing some really great stuff around STEM learning, creative, critical thinking learning with young people with disabilities. And I started doing a coding program with a bunch of the students there. And it was just absolutely brilliant, because you got these young people with, and once again, complex autism. Maybe they only focus on one thing or whatever. And I got them doing this. It's kind of like Scratch. It was called Tinker. And I was doing this block coding with them and making games and doing stuff. They all got it. And the reason they got it is because at home, it doesn't matter. They're all playing with devices. They're all got their same devices that anybody else has, and they know. And it's also the great thing about coding too, is because you can break it down into tasks, and you go, this does this, and then you do this and do this. It just lends itself so nicely to a lot of the scaffolding and the task that you can do with young people with disabilities. So that's where I was. Yeah.
Yeah. Next question we had was, what were some of the highlights? And we've got a bit of a list, I think, on the next slide.
Yeah. So basically, the other thing is what I did is I set up a lab, which is a really great program that has been run out of the Vic Uni and then started in Footscray and is across Australia now. It's just absolutely brilliant, particularly for young people with autism in mainstream schools. We did a lot. These guys here were in what's called the accessible makerspace. So basically, I got a room out in Lilydale. I got a bunch of people from that I knew in different organisations. They did a big mural on the wall. They gave me some equipment, and we set up a accessible makerspace. And when I say accessible, it was, the idea here is that it was, if someone came in, say had complex cerebral palsy and they wanted to do something, well then we would create accessible buttons out of Play-Doh and makey and all the things that I'd seen from the US. And so that happened. I was involved in the first Tom, which is a great Israeli thing that happens around the world. And it's primarily about looking at getting people from universities together to do hackathons for ideas around for people with disabilities. And the one we did was for an older guy who wanted his iPad, basically what it was happening in the day service. His iPad was being put in front of him. It wouldn't turn off. He wouldn't be able to turn it off himself. It would run out of battery. So we created a little platform whereby he had the iPad. He could do it himself, and we set it up with all these accessible buttons. And he got to watch the Richmond Football Club, horse racing, and John Farnham. That's all he wanted. So we got that organised.
Mike, I was just thinking about when you were talking about the using, for example, makey and the clay and stuff to do inputs. That's actually, do you feel like that's a valuable activity too for students that wouldn't be classified as special needs, but just in mainstream schooling? Because, it is definitely one of those things in the Digitech curriculum is to explore user experience and user interfaces. So it feels like there could be a lot of combination there as well.
Oh yeah. And the makey is a brilliant one. I would say to be honest, and you've probably all seen these anyway. The micro bits are the ones that I use now more. They've been. I find that once again, it's that block coding. The make coding is just brilliant working with young people because you can really structure it and scaffold it around the right way for people to use. So, look, I'll run through the rest of it, but the only one I would say is so I'm running one at the moment where for a disability organisation. I ran one last week, and so and look, if I jump around a little bit, forgive me. A lot of my inspiration comes from an organisation called the Thinking Studio, which is over in San Francisco. It is. I would love to have something here in Australia. I think it's just the most fantastic thing. And one of the things I was working with them doing last week was the circuit boards. And, just making little circuit boards. And I mean, these have been around forever and a day, just with a piece of wood, a couple of nails, just conductive, using alligator clips. Incredible. You take these, you start building that at that level with young people with disability, and they suddenly get the light bulb going. It's like any young person. They get the light bulb going. They get a switch going. It starts to work. It's easy to make. It costs hardly anything to run. And this is part of the thing, is that you don't have to do it at an expensive level. I see a lot of STEM programs around, and they've got the robots and they've got the 3D printer and all that. It's great. 3D printers take a lot of effort, and you need a decent one, because otherwise all you're doing is creating just little things. Robots are great, but hey, look, you can make a robot out of cardboard and a microbit, and you can make it really, really exciting. And you can, so what I'm saying is that to introduce these sorts of tinkering with young people, particularly young people with disabilities, it's great to combine, your cardboard with your technology and everything. So.
Oh, I forgot to mention, just as Mike's continuing there, please do put questions in the chat if you have any questions for Mike, and we will have a moment sometime before the end of today for Mike to answer your question. Sorry, Mike, carry on.
Oh no, so that was the that's probably the end of that.
No worries.
Yeah.
Our next question was, who have been your inspirations? And
yeah,
there are a few things here.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm trying to think of the teacher's name. I think she's on maternity leave at the moment, but Nathan, you'll probably know. She did a Mel down at Bulleen Heights. She does she's got a maker space down there. She's a very committed teacher, and she understands this. There are Yarra Rangers, SDS, for example, do the most amazing television program, and they've been doing that for a number of years. There are some fantastic teachers who understand this creative and critical thinking, and that's what I've learned from Croydon Yarra Rangers. The lab, forgive me if I don't remember all the names. Dr. Stefan, he now runs one of the technology schools. He's a brilliant guy. Dr. Christian Ellis is at Monash University, and she's invented these little things called tape blocks, which I don't have in front of me, but she's done an amazing piece. If you look up tape blocks, so TAPE blocks, it's essentially what she was looking at is the same thing that I was looking at: low cost, interesting things you can do with people with disabilities. And it's really just a foam block with conductive tape around it, and it works the same way as the circuit blocks, basically. And the tinkering studio. So there's some really great courses on you can do online for free from the tinkering studio. There's another really great guy that Ryan. He has an organization called the Wonderful Idea Company, and they're both US, and he does a lot of this kind of thing again, which is low cost, interesting. Yes, it's a little bit science, but at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is you're trying to bring people together. And I've seen it in all of this. People who wouldn't work together come together because they're interested in what's happening. Yes, it's a little bit science-based, but it's a little bit art-based. It's as much as possible, I throw the design thinking principles in there, because, once again, it's important for people to understand that if you fail, you've got another chance. Prototyping, bringing it up. I've got a boy at the moment that he wants a staff. He's changed his name to Merlin, and he wants a staff that can come to him with a light on the end, and he's going to have his walking stick, because he needs a walking stick inside the staff. And so we've started prototyping that with straws and a little LED, and personally, I don't know how we're going to do it, but I mean, we will get there. And it's about, it's that prototyping thing, and it's you do. I mean, the sort of thing that you can start to see with these young people is, and I'll use this example. I use it all the time because it's a good one. Young man who was at the Accessible Makerspace. He liked hairdressing, but he wouldn't be you wouldn't give him a scissors. And so what he did is we took him down to the local hairdresser, and he just basically sat there and watched and talked and everything. And then he went back to the accessible maker space. He liked to draw, so we used a simple graphic design program, and he created a newsletter for the hairdresser. So now he's involved in the hairdresser. He's got a meaningful sort of link between him and the hairdresser, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he's hairdressing. And it's those sorts of, I find with tinkering, you can start to see what people could possibly do or how you could create opportunities for them. So, yeah.
Wonderful. What are the benefits of tinkering and making for young people with a disability?
Yeah, so one of the big things is social engagement. If you look at the lab, I was amazed when that was put on. You've got these young people who are isolated at mainstream schools come together in a space that's around gaming and everything, and they start, after a couple of sessions, they start looking over people's shoulders and they start asking questions and they start coming together. And I found with the tinkering, and this lad, for example, is all he liked was the flash, but there was so much we could do with him with the flash. We could talk about speed. We could talk about cos costumes. We could talk about the benefits of what the flash actually did. And he created this. I didn't quite understand how it fitted with the flash, but he saw it. It was sort of a light thing that he created. You can co-design the activities with tinkering. You can get there was one of the programs I did was with a bunch of young people with really complex physical disabilities. And at first I was stumped about a lot of things we could do with them. But they actually came to me with ideas, and one of them was, and we'd seen it online, but we did it in a bigger space. We put foil down on the ground and we set it up with a makey, and then they went across in the wheelchairs and they attached the ground to the wheelchair and basically played the piano on the ground. We tried to do it at the school, but there was an OH&S thing, so we couldn't do that, unfortunately. It would have been awesome across the hall. So tinkering lessons can be adapted for any disability. I've worked with really complex intellectual and autism difficulties and been able to create something, because there's always an interest that the young person has, and you can also always create something with them. It's about creating something with them, and you can set up, the great thing about tinkering is you can set up little tasks, so it's scaffolded. Once again, if you've got people with complex physical disabilities, you don't need to go out and buy the big $100 buttons. You can create with makey or touchboard or another of these little mini computers. You can, with Play-Doh or a bit of foil, you can create a really interesting button, and it's that kind of thing which, and once again, you're co-designing with the person. So you're learning and they're learning, and that's the beauty about tinkering.
What skills can be taught? I think you might have already touched on a couple of these, but
yeah. So it definitely works on this creative and critical thinking, because it's creating this idea of I can make something, and it's also about getting them to think about that I can make something, but then I can make it a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better. Enterprising skills, you start to, with the Bullying Heights guys, a couple of them actually went on, and this is not because of the coding program, it was because of the school, but it also developed some of their ideas about what they wanted to do. They went on and did 1 day a week at a gaming studio. So it's about getting them to understand that they can actually do things. They don't have to go and settle for what has been done in the past. There's more opportunities. Collaboration. A lot of these kids don't know how to collaborate because it's so hard in a daily situation managing themselves. So getting them opportunities to just stop and actually have some fun and play and actually build that cooperation. Definitely about taking risks and making mistakes, because a lot of people and this is one of the biggest problems that happens when anybody leaves school, is that we're all told we shouldn't make mistakes, and everyone should make mistakes and learn from mistakes. And there's no difference for young people with a disability, and particularly the special schools. They have to be allowed to make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, but do it in a way that's fun. Because if you take the circuit boards, if it's not working, then you can look at a whole lot of different things that might be. The wires may not be connected, the batteries might be out, the little things not screwed in right. There's a lot of things you can look at in that space.
All right. Just a reminder, folks, if you do have another question for Mike, please do feel free to put it in the chat, and we will come to it at the end. How can you make tinkering and this sort of making accessible for different disability types?
Yeah, so part of it is about looking at so for example, you can make accessible buttons. That's not hard. You can make accessible buttons. You can create, you might, for example, I'm thinking of the group that I'm just seeing at the moment. I pre-cut a lot of things. I don't, because it's about time, and it's not about the cutting of the cardboard. It's about the putting it together and thinking about what they're going to do with those pieces. Build on the students' prior interests and knowledge. So it's great to sit down and just talk to the students. I had a student who I was having a lot of problems with because they didn't want to engage, but then they threw out a thing to me and they said, we want to build an Enigma machine. Now they're fascinated by World War II. I said, Enigma machine? Awesome. You mean with the clog? We can make those little cogs, and we can do wheels and stuff. And he sort of went, really? I said, yeah, of course we can do that. We can do that, and you just create some wooden wheels and do some wheels and make a mock-up, and we can start building that, and we can do that. That's the piece that's really important, is to understand what their prior interest and knowledge is. Definitely structure when you start. So when you're working with it might take longer than working with say other students, is you need to structure everything. You need to actually use things like visual aids. So you might have a visual aid of, if you're using the circuit boards, you do this, you do this, you do this, and you have the visual aid for them. You have examples that they can look at and they can touch and use. You have a number of different things that they can do, because what I find too is they'll be interested in one thing and then they'll lose interest and they might want to play on something else. But that's okay, because that's part of the tinkering process. So if they're working over here on something else, and they might be working with some Lego and they might be putting some LEDs in it or doing something like that, to my mind, that's fine. They're developing something. I can work with these guys here, and then I'll come over and start to say, what else can you do? So that's important too, having different opportunities. We'll get to the next slide. Once again, I say you don't have to have you don't have to set it. Yeah, you don't have to set it up with high costs. I mean, I started out at the lab. I got a grant, and I had 2 3D printers, and I had this and that. 3D printers were just a pain. They were just a pain. And I know they work really well, and you see them at libraries, and lots of schools have them. But you can do so much more around tinkering. You can do, one of the things, you get a whiteboard and you can create a table out of it. Op shops are really great. And what I'm finding is not the same as the States, because I've been trying to do this thing where you basically go in and get the. So I got a toy last week that was $1 in one of the op shops. I ripped it apart. It's got 4 buttons. It's got what else has it got? It's got a music thing, and then I've got the head. And the idea is that eventually I might get, like I was talking to a guy the other day, and I said, you might get a bear and you might get a Darth Vader head and stick the Darth Vader head on top of it and change the and do like a toy crate. So you can get things out of toys. Definitely not tech for tech's sake. There is Lego's great. Lego's quite expensive unless you can get it from like people who haven't used it before. And I'm not knocking these products. If you can get them, that's great. There are things like, I was thinking of cheap things. The microbit is fantastic. I mean, it really is fantastic. It's cheap. You can do a lot with it. Cardboard. This is actually a switch I made. So just without a conductive tape and a piece of cardboard, so you can make your own switches. You can, circuit boards. What else am I going to do? You can get wood and you can drill out the wood, big circles, and you can start making your own, and you might get a couple little motors, and then you create your own motorized vehicle. So there's lots of things you can do. What I'd say is market it. So it's really, if you're interested in doing tinkering, invite other staff and family to have a tinker, and they get interested in it, and then they say, how can we actually help? And I think that's the interesting thing, is that a lot of people, when you talk to them, they say, tinker, it's just, it's playing. You're just playing. You're not playing. This is a really good introduction to STEM, to STEAM, to building on those skills. There are some really good articles out there that actually say this is about building up the skills of young people. And it's really good to get, once that people get their hand on things, they actually start saying, this is actually really fun. So that's what I definitely do.
I love that. I love the idea of having something at your school where you can get the parents in on it as well. It's terrific. So Mike, we're getting towards the end of the questions. Where can you go for good resources?
So I've got a few here. The Wonderful Idea Company and the Tinkering Studio. The Tinkering Studio has a whole lot of really great things you can download, which tell you about different tinkering activities. Tape Blocks is another cheap entry point. Microbits, and Microbits has huge amount of projects. Renovated Learning she's a Diana Reed, and she's a librarian in Florida, and she set up a makerspace in her library, and it's really interesting the journey that she went through and what she's done. She's become quite well known in the States around doing library makerspace and stuff, but she talks a lot about low costs and about scaffolding and about building up the ideas, and it's an interesting one. I haven't used this so much, but I put this in because I know it's some teachers up in Queensland, Makerspaces Australia. They do have some really nice stuff there. That's an Australian one, and I of course you guys as well. So we'll put you in as well.
Thanks for the plug there, Mike. Great. Yeah, I mean, I think we might be towards the end now. We're at the half-hour mark. So, Mike, maybe we'll do the last question. How can we get in touch with you? And then we'll open the floor up to questions from people. So, how can people get in touch with you, Mike? That's your contact details there.
Yeah, that's my details. Look, I would be happy to come out and run tinkering programs. I'm passionate about it, absolutely passionate about it. So if anyone wants to get in touch with me, I'm only too happy to come out and run a few activities. So
Great. All right. Well, since we've got a fairly small group tonight, if you do want to ask a question and you're happy to be in the recording, feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask Mike a question directly, or you can choose to put it in the chat if you like. Greg, I'm just looking at your questions from earlier. Is that the Exploratorium in San Fran? Yeah, I think the link we had just then looks like it is that one, isn't it? The Tinkering Studio Exploratorium. And Greg, you mentioned Dr. Stefan Schutt. Where was that from?
So Mike quickly mentioned Stefan, and that's his full name. So okay. Mike, I think we've met before, Mike. I was just looking through my emails, and we had a few meetings in 2018, I think it was.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Crazy year for me, and we lost contact after that, but I'd really love to touch base again. Good on you for doing what you've done so far. I remember in 2018 you were looking at a space in Faulkner, I think, working for Urella at the time.
Oh yeah, that's with Urella. That was the at Faulkner we were setting up the space there. But to be honest, I didn't find the disability. This is the first disability organisation I'm working with now that actually understands that tinkering is not. It's not a situation that is just playing. It's absolutely something that is worthwhile.
Absolutely, totally agree. I've been running a makerspace in English language schools across Melbourne for this is my 4th year, and it's been one of the biggest problems has been convincing teachers who have been in the system for many years that, hey, tinkering, there's actually quite a lot of learning that happens if we allow the kids to just kind of play with the technology and remove the structure. And what's happened is that there's a lot of creativity that has come out of just allowing those kids to tinker without necessarily enforcing any sort of specific outcome on them. And that's been probably the most difficult thing to convince teachers of. So I hear you loud and clear that, you know, a lot of teachers just don't take the idea of tinkering seriously at all. And yet when we walk into an artist studio, you'll see that a lot of what happens in there is very similar to tinkering. It's playing with materials and coming up with my ideas as you work with the materials themselves. So I totally agree with you, and I've had evidence to show that this is actually working in my particular context as well. So my diverse needs students are English language. They've only just come to Australia. Their English is very, very poor. So that presents a whole range of challenges in terms of getting them to work with tools and materials. And so that's why I was kind of really interested in this particular presentation as well. So yeah, thanks, Mike. You've come a long way since 2018.
Thanks, Greg.
You guys made me think of Dr. Gary Steger and the whole sort of learning by doing approach. Yeah. And one of the things we sometimes do when we run PL is we have a provocative question where we'll get people to stand in a line and we'll say, okay, do you agree with this statement that you can teach digital technologies without having to use computers, you know, and we'll get people to stand at one end or the other, and neither is wrong, but we want to talk about this idea that, you know, like, you don't have to be sitting down doing strict exercises of coding or whatever to learn these things, and many of us who are passionate about coding and really enjoyed it and have now become teachers of it, we forget that when we were learning it, it was a hobby for a lot of us. It was something that we played around with and spent a lot of time just playing, not doing exercises. All right, any other questions from anyone?
Thank you.
All right, well, thanks again, everybody. I'll stop the recording there. I can see a comment there from Kim. Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate hearing another educator passionate about inclusive STEM learning. Loved it. Appreciate the tips of places to get cheap, free tinkering stuff. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Melanie.